Um, Hi, Jen, Victor. It's so nice to have you here chatting with me. I know we talk regularly, but I think today the conversation for today is going to be very special and different.
Mm,
Um, I feel like we as a company, we obviously when we talk about inclusion, we try to
yeah,
talk about it in a more intersectional perspective and a perspective where it is not the normal narrative which the world sees it as. And I feel one of the ways that we try to do that is also look at like gender in its entirety. And
yeah,
when we look at the normal narrative, and I feel like, which, not to take away its credit, and I feel like he has obviously the female gender or genders that are other than the male gender are
yeah.
in the background and in the vicinity where like they are definitely at a disadvantaged position. But I
Hmm.
think when we
Yeah,
talk about that narrative, we often forget that there are things and there are aspects which the male gender also goes
hmm.
through, and which might be the reason might still be the same. As much as
Yeah,
the women are discriminated, I feel like there are aspects because of the same problem that the society has, that
yeah,
men sometimes are also sort of at the risk of cer- certain things, especially the one very significant thing being men's mental well-being.
hmm.
And I think, and that is why I think this conversation is super, super special to me as well as Endeavor's company, where I just really want to talk to both of you. You're some of my closest colleagues at Endeavor's company, but I think one of the things we rarely talk about is, you know, what does the whole being a man mean to you? And I think
Hmm.
on this special sort of occasion of November and men's um, International Men's Day, I just
Yeah,
want to start this conversation with you guys.
hmm.
First of all, should we introduce ourselves quickly?
Sure.
Maybe Jay, you can go first.
Okay. Hi all. I'm Jay. I am head of content at Endeavors Company.
And I'm Victor. I'm multimedia designer at West Company.
Okay, thanks. And I am Prachi, consultant at Endeavor's company. Great. So should we kick things off? I have my first
Absolutely.
question ready for you.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So my first question is more about identity and
Hmm.
what does masculinity mean to you, and I think I'm just going to
Hmm.
further that question a little bit and ask you
Mhm.
to think about where this idea of masculinity has come from.
Hmm. Hmm.
Shall I pick names or do you want to volunteer?
It's a it's a tricky one because I'm sure that my idea of masculinity is like not come from like one source. It's a patchwork of different sources. Uh, I'm curious, Victor, what's it like for you? Is it the same? Is it a patchwork of different sources, or is it that you have your idea come from like one or two really clear sources?
No, it's not from one or two sources.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that my understanding of masculinity and being a man
Yeah.
today is quite different from what it was when I was a
Mm,
teenager, for example, or
Hmm.
20 years old.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and um, yeah, back then, what's masculinity? Masculinity. That's the characteristics that attributed or attributes that are given to describe a man,
Yeah.
uh, and the social expectations of being a man as well. And back in the days when I was younger,
Yeah.
you know, that was for me that was to be strong, fearless,
Mm.
brave, to have muscles, to go to the
Yeah.
gym,
Yeah.
um, to not cry, not show emotions,
Yeah.
weaknesses. And I do remember that I was struggling with that.
Yeah.
For example, back in the days, my friends classmates, they are quite sporty, most of
Yeah.
them, playing football, playing different sports. And I was never a huge fan of, sports, never played
Mm.
football.
Yeah.
And I do remember that me not playing or being really bad at it
Yeah.
because I wasn't interested in it has caused, caused not troubles, but people to make fun of me,
Yeah.
to not call me, man,
Yeah.
boy, which was quite a struggle.
Yeah.
So I think that's, probably we're going to tap later on that, but that's one of the main issues,
Yeah.
the expectations that
Yeah.
are coming from the society. And
Yeah.
back on the question, I'm really grateful to my parents and my father, who is a huge role model for me, that I was never kind of introduced to that perception of being a man and being masculine.
Yeah.
My father has always been respectful, has been treating my mother as the more important figure within the family. I've seen my father crying in front of me. I've seen my father having, sharing his thoughts, his, struggles,
Yeah.
which actually, in years' time led me to build this maybe slightly different concept of what's to be a man nowadays.
Yeah. 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 There's so many interesting points there, because there is this element of these ideas from society slowly permeate into how, like, what our expectations are of ourselves.
Mm.
And one thing you mentioned, Victor, that's really important is, and I think this is the case for anybody, but especially I think human beings at that age of adolescence, when we're finding our identities, when you don't fall in line with a norm or with the norm around you, the first, I guess, assumption is there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually resonated with what Victor said as well. I mean, especially the fact that the male figures in my life, I have seen both very, like, the traditionally masculine people who think that this is how a man should be, and like if they're not doing it correctly, they are, wrong or different. But at the same time, Victor, and I'm very passionate about this as well, is the fact that my brother, my dad have been those people who, I've seen growing up, that they are the most like gentle and people who can show their emotions. And when you say show your emotions, it generally it means that people are, like, you see men as like angry all the time, but you know what, like they do have other emotions as well. And portraying that, it's such a simple thing, but it's also such a rare thing sometimes to see in men, which I think again is from the fact that Jay said, like the expectations from a man and the biases that we hold against them. So yeah.
Yeah. Although I'm
Great.
curious, Victor,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go for it.
No, just a small question. Victor, you mentioned this idea that these ideas were coming to you from society, but I'm curious, like, what do you think were some of the mechanisms through which society was bleeding these ideas into your life? Was it movies? Was it friends? Was it things family members would say? What exactly were the sources?
The sources were, particularly for me, just seeing that in other people, this way of attitude.
Yeah.
And here is, it's, of course, it's very important, the figure of the parents. That's no doubt about it, because the kids are following their parents' steps. But it's probably equally important is the friends and the people around you. The first 6 years you live at your place, for example, with your parents, but then at that crucial age, in which actually you are becoming a person, starting having your own opinion, building your own points of view. You're actually surrounded by other people who have been probably educated in another way, who have been led by another example. And when you have a dominant presence of particular kind of mindset, particular kind of approach towards some issues, situations, then you're starting feeling weak because you're on your own. Then you're starting doubting yourself. Probably, as you said, there's something wrong with me. What's going on here? And then, of course, you as a different person from the others, you're not well accepted. And in this crucial moment of your life, you don't want to be unaccepted. You want to be accepted. You want to be with the others.
Exactly.
Right? And that's the point where actually I think that most of the people, I'm not talking only about, boys here, I'm talking in general. This is the crucial point where most of the people are changing their perception and building their kind of future beliefs and approaches towards certain matters.
And either you fall in line at this point, or you prepare yourself for, I guess, emotionally the difficult and arduous task of not falling in line and being your own individual.
Exactly.
Jared, did you have any ideas that in growing up, where do you think your sort of biases came from?
It's an excellent question. I think I can put it this way. I'm so grateful to the men in my life who was closest to my dad, I guess. And then my relatives, I think particularly, I think I spend the most time with my grandfathers and then my uncles. But very interestingly, masculinity was not a huge part of the general discourse. So I think what I saw in them, even if they were sensitive or gentle, I never interpreted it as being, oh, this is a version of masculinity. To me, it was like, okay, this is just being a human being. I think the idea of masculinity, it came to me really later on, like Victor said, when I was in my teens, when your peer group starts to, oh, you don't sit that way. Oh, you don't talk that way. Oh, you don't walk that way. That's when you become cognizant of, okay, this identity prescribes me to behave in these ways. And I think even then, I never really took it seriously. I think the time I started taking masculinity seriously was way late in my development. I would say when I was like 18, 17, when I was searching for, I guess, a sense of direction in terms of how am I supposed to be a person. I think that's when, as opposed to masculinity being thrust on me and making me feel whatever about myself, I think I reached out and explored masculinity. What does being a man mean? What do people say about being a man? And for me, I think the big source was art. So authors, poets, musicians, and then also I would say people in other arts that I was interested in. So martial arts, this and that, hearing reflections on that, that's when this idea started to crystallize of, okay, this is what masculinity is. So I'd say those are the two main sources.
So as far as I understood, Jay, you took this kind of more philosophical approach towards the matter rather than, that's great.
And not to say that I didn't have your experiences of, people, bullying you or making you feel weird for a particular aspect of your identity or how you behave. But I don't know, because the environment at home, masculinity wasn't some value that was extolled. So I never had a hang up about it. It was never something I felt insecure about or I had to prove myself. It was more about just be a human being.
On that, it just something that happened to me this summer. When we were talking about insecurities and things like that. I was, visiting another town with my, girlfriend and her parents. And at this particular moment, it was me, my girlfriend, and her mother. And of course, I was with all of the luggage,
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, I've, you know, being a man, I don't know. I'm taking the luggage. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Of course, I won't allow, you know, 40 kilogram of a woman to carry 20 kilogram of back.
Yeah.
Anyway, and you know, I bumped into one man, you know, on the street, and he was
Yeah.
looking at me like that, looking at them. He was like, you know, he asked me, "Are you a boss or a staff?" And I was really, yeah, that's exactly what he asked me. And I was like, you know, what do you mean? Are you boss or a staff? Why are you carrying all
Yeah.
of the bags? And I was
Yeah.
like, well, then, you know, I'm a staff. You know what I mean? That's, you know, if you question, you know, response like that because I'm,
Yeah.
you know, carrying all the bags, you know, rather than give them to the, you know, women and me leading them on the street.
Yeah.
You know, that was just, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really weird and funny when it comes how people can build their self-esteem and feel secure
Yeah.
by relating, you know, to such a basic kind of,
Yeah.
you know, examples or models
Yeah.
of behavior.
Yeah. And there's actually, and I'm mindful Prachi will also have other questions, so I don't want to dwell too much. But I think like there's two aspects that are coming out of masculinity. I think there's somewhere you're sort of given a list of like prescriptions again and said that this is masculinity. But I
Yeah.
think there's another aspect of sometimes you do something and then retrospectively you ascribe it to masculinity. So say for
Yeah.
instance, in this situation, when you mentioned the lifting bags thing,
Yeah.
I guess the part of me that's caring would naturally want to do that. And it's only later that, you know, I did the behavior and I'm like, oh, okay, it can be linked to masculinity that, oh, you know, men are supposed to support and care and da da da.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's sometimes where you're told the behavior first and then you do it. But there's sometimes you already do the behavior and then you link it retrospectively to masculinity.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of leads me to my next question because, we've touched a little bit here and there about that already, is that how does then masculinity sort of manifest in your life? Like, do you
Hmm.
think, do you find any aspects of masculinity restrictive? Because, you know, that's one of the things that we just discussed, where like, because you have to be masculine, that is why you cannot do certain other things which you would probably want to do. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Hmm.
I would say it for myself with just, you know, a very short answer. Probably no, because I'm not kind of living, you know, trying to kind of cover these standards or expectations.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not worried about that. You know, I don't think that I'm willing to hear anyone who would, you know, define me, you know, either I'm going to be man enough or not man enough based on, you know, something I do or I don't.
Yeah. And
Especially, yeah, if these people are people who are not, yeah, random people on the street or whatever.
but I feel like that's very brave of you because even in certain aspects where, and I kind of want to relate this to then me being a woman, right? Where like because people expect certain things of me,
Yeah.
I do that. I do those things because, you know, I don't want to create that sort of friction. And I feel
Yeah.
like, you know, that takes so much bravery to actually be yourself
Yeah.
100%, not thinking about what people around you are going to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, kudos to that also, Victor.
Yeah.
But
I
what
think
are your
it's,
experiences, Jay?
I think I really I resonate with Victor. I think it's really and I resonate with what you said, Prachi. I think it's really difficult to face that friction when you don't fall neatly into a box.
Yeah.
But then I think once you do that, it's really difficult to do it any other way. Because when you've been authentic, to then go back to inauthenticity it's almost impossible to do. It feels like you're really eroding a part of your soul in somewhere. And I would say I don't know. I don't feel any constraints or any like any of the social norms around masculinity really wearing me down necessarily. Although what I would say is, I think I'm privileged in a sense that I'm in an environment that is, I would say, friendly enough or safe enough that I don't have to worry about it. I'm mindful that if I were in a hostile environment, like say for instance, these are extreme examples, but if you're in a prison where you're surrounded just by men, or you're in a really, really economically vulnerable part of town, where there's lots of gang violence and this and that, I can understand how in hostile environments, suddenly masculinity, looking tough, survival, all of these concepts really start to blend. And so I think in those environments, you see I guess, A, the harshest versions of masculinity, and B, you see people really striving to, I guess, hold on to the stereotypical archetypal idea of masculinity. Because that's linked to you being able to survive, or that's linked to you not being trampled in some hierarchy or taken advantage of. So, but what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely agree. I just want to say, absolutely agree with that point.
Yeah.
But
I'm just sorry, Jay. No, I want to hear Prachi's question first. I have a follow-up question to this. So.
Oh, okay, fine. So I actually wanted to kind of then lead this on because I feel like I'm talking to two ideal men right now who are able to kind of cross through that. But like I'm very interested in like your idea because not everyone might be able to do what you are doing, right? And I feel like let's simplify it. Let's talk about 4 or 5 things or like biases or like expectations of men, right? Which put them in this position. So one I can think of is that men have to be the breadwinners, and like even if other people in the house are working, they need to be the souls. They need to be that provider where like everybody can then lean on to them. The other thing I was thinking also, and where showing emotions, and that emotion is not always anger. Can they show emotions such as being needing help or like showing vulnerability? Are they able to do that as much as other genders? Is that one of the expectations of them? I mean, just sorry, I kind of dwell on this point a little bit, but till the age of 6 or 7, I thought that men weren't able to physically cry. Like, can you believe it? Like, I thought that I had never seen a man cry until I was 6 years old, when I saw my father cry for the first time. And can you imagine something like that ingrained in a child's mind? So that's what I'm talking about. So I think like these are 2 of my examples. I'm sure there are others, right, which you can think of, and in that aspect, then I want to kind of think about how then do you think does that restrict a man being the person that he wants to be?
And also, like, if I can just add on to Prachi's question, Victor, this is one that you might find interesting. These pressures, A, do they exist, like Prachi said, which ones? But B, do you also feel in environments, in social environments, where it's just you and other men, no women, do you feel like there's a heightened, I guess, tendency to maybe be more stereotypically masculine than if you are not surrounded purely by men?
Yes.
Yeah.
They do. The social expectations are there. I mean, they exist. What we are talking with Jay earlier is, in probably our, bubble, we are just not allowing these things to kind of, affect us personally, but it's there for sure. I've had friends. I'm seeing that almost every day on different
Mm.
occasions. And on your question, Jay, again, yes. We, for example, again, with the risk of me, being silly here and funny, again, one of these moments in my life, I'm with,
Yeah.
my girlfriend in our car, and I'm talking to her, but, I'm talking joyfully, full of love, with all these, sweet words. Oh, honey, blah, blah, I love you so much, you're so beautiful. And suddenly, by the car, we are with drop down windows, by the car is passing one, kind of friend of mine from
Yeah.
high school. And he was like,
Yeah.
oh, how you doing, man? I was like, oh, how you doing? Yeah, I'm good. Suddenly, like, changed
Yeah.
my tone of voice. It's like one of these situations
Oh,
Yeah.
we've all seen,
Yeah.
these clips, how,
yeah.
your man is listening to a nice song, in his car, singing, suddenly stopping on the red light, and
Yeah.
he see another kind of film. He's changing the radio station to something,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a very good
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it does exist,
Yeah.
The problem is, I think, when these characteristics, these behaviors, allowed to kind of characterize what's good and bad,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's made you a good man. That's what made you man enough, for example.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as you said, Prachi, one of those expectations probably although I believe that it highly depends on the, for example, cultural environment where I can, speak mainly for example, for what I've seen here in my country, Bulgaria, where
Yeah.
Mm.
the contrast is really big. For one reason or another, I'm going to save my personal opinion here to not get into
Yeah.
some kind of political history.
Mhm.
But yeah, man is expected to be tough, strong,
Mm.
breadwinner to earn money. Even in the culture of our, country, and probably it's not only our country, in the area, in
Yeah.
the Balkans, for example, Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
quite often when you have two kids, brother and
Yeah.
sister, quite often the heritage in terms of property, for example, is
Mm.
given to the boy because
Yeah.
he's expecting, to kind of build up a family,
Yeah.
to kind
Yeah.
of continue the family.
Yeah.
And the girl is kind of given to the other side, to her husband.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
you can see how this is, again, tapping on these social expectations, norms, etc. Now, nowadays, this is not so often because, it's just a different time. But then again, a man is expected to provide home, to provide place, here, to
Yeah.
have a car.
Yeah.
We've already discussed with you, the dance moves that a man is expected to have in a
Yeah.
discotheque, which are none. You're just expected to sit over there, God forbid that you're going to kind of, enjoy the music and do
Yeah.
some dance moves. These things exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are very sad. I'm
Yeah.
seeing that, I'm seeing this in friends of mine in their behavior as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think,
And quite often we
yeah. Sorry, Victor, you've frozen a little bit.
sorry, I thought that you wanted to say something.
No, it froze. I thought you would
Ah.
pause, but it had frozen. Sorry.
Yeah. So I wanted to say that as growing up in the past couple of years,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of close people to me who
Yeah.
expected to kind of live up to these standards, expectations.
Yeah.
to struggle a lot mentally, and they fell into depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They fell into a very kind of dangerous lifestyle with, for example, gambling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's
Yeah.
exactly because of that, you know, again, I don't want to start talking about the gambling, but in its essence, it's giving hope to a desperate person,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
isn't it?
guess it also comes from the fact that um if they are feeling a certain way, they are not able to express it or showcase it, and I think it kind
Yeah,
of just builds up within themselves. They think
Yeah.
that they
yeah,
are not expected to be like this, and therefore
yeah,
if they say something
yeah,
of that sort, it suddenly it's going
yeah.
to put them down. And I think
Yeah.
that sort of leads me to my next question. But Jay, I just want to pause and ask, was there a point that you wanted to add before I move on to the next
Mm.
one?
No, nothing. I'm just reflecting on what Victor said. I think Victor's raised a couple of really interesting points. I think one point, Prachi and Victor, you've raised that's magnificent, which is that there's certain aspects of masculinity which are in general, like Victor said, the whole thing about having the car, buying the house, all of that. But there's also certain aspects of masculinity that are contextual and situational, where they
Mm-hmm.
increase in certain contexts and then they decrease in other contexts. I think that is a really interesting point. And I think another really interesting point, Victor, that you made at the end there is the idea of masculinity, whatever that case is, I think is usually so impossible that if we're carrying that standard around in our head and constantly comparing ourselves to an impossible standard, we're constantly going to feel inadequate. And then that will have, I think, the kind of consequences that Prachi is also alluding to.
Yeah. And therefore, my next question is, in most parts, we know that men are looked at as the more privileged gender.
Yeah.
But what do you think we're missing in this narrative?
I think I have some thoughts on this, but Victor, I'll pause for a moment if you have some thoughts on this.
Go for it.
Yeah. I think one thing, and I was talking about this to somebody else only recently, that while in some sense it's believed like the societal advantage is concentrated much more in the hands of people who are men than people who are not. What's interesting is when we look at the mental health outcomes, if we look at suicide just as one proxy, for instance, you'll see that the disparity is actually skewed against the favor of men. There's much more male suicide. There's much more, I guess, prevalence of certain, I guess, mental illnesses when it comes to men, so on and so forth. Again, I'm not entirely sure about the latter, but the suicides I definitely know about. And I found that an interesting thing, that why is it that a gender which is more privileged is actually having worse outcomes when it comes to certain mental health related metrics. And I think that's kind of an open question that's worth discussing.
I think so.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Victor and Prachi?
I agree with you. It's interesting. It's an interesting statistic because I think these are facts, and probably it's that weight of responsibility, if you wish, that you have to fulfill these duties. And as we mentioned earlier, about you're constantly comparing yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a constant loop. I mean, that's a race that you cannot win if you compare yourself to kind of first unrealistic standards, or second, if you compare yourself to other people who might be, wearing the stamp of, successful, great or big man, etc.
Yeah.
Someone, I can't remember who, but no, actually, I remember one artist here from my country. He said that that's poison to compare yourself to other people. The person that you have to compare yourself is yourself from yesterday.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I have an idea about this that I wanted to sort of throw out to both of you and hear your
Mm.
thoughts on it. But I think that the genesis of these, I guess, struggles with masculinity, and I think the struggles with masculinity, I think, comes from what the characteristics of traditional masculinity are. But I think
Mm.
those traditional characteristics of masculinity come from a place of, I think, they served a purpose. And I think in the context of if we're living in I guess earlier times where
Mhm.
there's a lot more, I guess, tribal warfare, violence, people exist in small groups and life is just punctuated constantly by some kind of violence or the other. It makes sense if you have, I guess, a conception of masculinity where men's lives are expendable and men's pain is ignored.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, in a chaotic world where, there's everybody is not a good faith actor, you need a group of people who are willing to go out there, lay their life on the line, who their pain is not given as much credence to, as much importance to, because without that, the gears of the system don't function. If that war
Mhm.
doesn't happen, you don't have resources, you all die. But if we can convince a group of people that go out there and die, it's glorious, it's the right thing to do, it's the thing you're supposed to do, the system unfortunately functions on this ugly truth.
Yeah.
So I think that's where this traditional concept came from. And I think
Mm.
what's happened now is the concept has stayed and I think it's ingrained, but the environment's changed completely. So now suddenly men don't need to be expendable about their lives. Men don't need to have like their pain, I guess, ignored or overlooked. But
Mm.
I guess what I'm thinking is like we need to help create new conceptions of masculinity because the
Yeah,
old
yeah,
ones they don't fit with the environment we're in.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think what obviously you're alluding to is like how we've evolved as human beings, and
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely think that the society needs to evolve too now. Like the way that people think needs to evolve, and uh, you just let people be, I guess. Um,
Yeah. And there's
The-
sorry.
No, go
No,
on.
just I guess one final point there. I think what's really crucial here, and I guess the point I mentioned earlier, is the sense of purpose.
Mm.
So
mm,
having something bigger than yourself that you can give your life to, that you can ignore your pain in service of, I think that
mm,
is maybe somewhere in the architecture of the male mind, if there is such a thing. I think
mm,
that idea is maybe ingrained in there. And I think all the negative aspects of masculinity, I think one big contributor is that sense of I don't know what my purpose or my place is in society.
mm,
I think that's where alienation, anger,
mm,
resentment, misogyny, I think all of that stems from this place of what am I supposed to be as a person if I'm not the person who sacrifices their life, who doesn't
mm.
go to war, who doesn't,
Yeah.
And Jay,
The
I'm just
root.
Hmm.
sorry, Victor, you go
No,
first.
go on, Prash,
Mm.
go on. Go on.
I'm just thinking when you say these things, because some of the things still sort of are relevant, right? Like
Yeah.
there are still expectations of men to go on to do like the more risky and the more
Yeah.
life-threatening things, or like
Yeah.
they have the more pressure on things such as livelihood and supporting their families, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
My point is, first of all, that needs to break down. Gender roles need to break down
Yeah.
completely. It's person. It's not the gender. Like
Yeah.
it's the person's decision what they want to do, what they don't want to do.
Yeah.
But even then, even if there is a man who wants to go out and like build, like help with livelihood, etc., can't they do both those things? Can't they kind of have this whole responsibility of the family, but at the same time go back to their homes and really show their emotion and talk about how they're feeling, or talk about how vulnerable they are? Can't those both things coexist? Why is that so
Hmm.
difficult?
Hmm.
And this is not a question as such, but I think more like a
Yeah.
just a thought that I had when you were
Yeah.
talking.
And it's
And I guess that is like one of the things that we need to then, as you said, like almost teach young boys is that, you know, you need to talk about how you're feeling, or you don't say that if a boy like falls down, you can't say things like boys don't cry. You
yeah.
know, things start from there, right? And I think if we try to break that narrative completely when the children are young, I guess that could go a
Yeah.
long way as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
I
But it's just one thing that I want to add here. I don't think it should be only educate and teach the boys as well. I
Mm,
think everyone should be
yeah,
aware
yeah,
that
of
these
course.
expectations are wrong, and as you said, Prachi, we need to break this
Definitely.
chain. And human being is human being with emotions, with feelings, with dreams, no matter what gender you are.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. I think just I guess one thing we need to be careful of, though. I agree with you completely, Prachi and Victor. That was beautiful. But I think as we expand the scope of what is acceptable for all human beings, I think we need to be mindful that we don't go from one end of the pendulum to the other end of the pendulum. What I mean is, if let's say a boy is crying, to stigmatize that and say boys don't cry, that's something we need to work against. But I think it's equally important that if a boy is naturally not crying, that we don't stigmatize the not crying as well. I think what tends to happen
Fair
is
enough.
people sort of, I maybe just like 30 seconds, but there's a really important insight I had when I was sort of doing my
Please.
training as a mental health professional. There was this therapist who spoke about this idea of like the concept of therapy and how in some sense there's certain assumptions built into it. So say for instance, there's this couch and there's two chairs and we're facing each other and we're talking about our feelings, and there's this tissue box in the middle, and so there's this expectation that we'll open up that way. And the question he was raising is that approach on average, is that best suited to all genders? Or is this approach more suited to maybe people, to some kinds of people, but not other kinds of people? And the point he eventually got to, based on his own clinical experience, was that when he works with men, what he's realized is men like to open up on average. Again, not every man, you don't need to fit into these buckets, but he said on average, he's noticed that men like to open up while they're engaged in another task. So say for instance, you and I are workshopping together, Victor. As we're workshopping and working on some third thing, that's when we sort of start to open up. Or we're both playing whatever, some sport or chess or something like that, and that's when we open up. And what he was saying is, as opposed to expecting men who aren't comfortable opening up in a situation where it's just me and you and we're sharing feelings, as opposed to expecting them to conform to this, why don't we go to where they are and where their comfort is and allow them to share in a matter that's most authentic to them? And I think that point's always stayed with me, that when it comes to emotions and stuff, yes, it's important to open up, but are we also giving room to people who are not maybe emotionally expressive in certain ways that we think is the norm? That becomes another norm then.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think I agree to your point, and I think one way to look at it is like, and going back to the whole boy example, is that you just let them know that any way they want to express is fine. Like, it's not that they have to do it in a certain way. It's more about giving them that space, that if this is how you want to express yourself, or if this is a certain thing that you want to do, you are and you should be able to do that. Almost that.
But this is creating a comfort and a safe zone, isn't it? And as Jay pointed out a couple of seconds ago, that when you're doing another kind of activity, you have a partner in that activity. Partner is kind of bridge creating this kind of safe zone, and that's probably why men tends to be more open about their feelings when they are doing, for example, sport, or when they are doing something jointly with other peers. The problem is when it comes to society, how to create a safe environment, safe
exactly,
society.
exactly,
You
exactly.
created a very nice segue because I think now that we're moving to the more solution part of
Yeah.
things, I think let's maybe look at, because we've discussed about what contributes to this uh, challenge, but then what is it that we can do about it? And I would really like to explore different areas. It could be around how we can do this as a society, but I also want to know how organizations can do this as well. And then obviously, if we want, we can also discuss like the more smaller units of like families or as parents or as teachers. But maybe like just some broad ideas around society and organizations would be good to discuss first.
Hear us. Okay, you're back.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Now
I
we
think
can.
it got cut off at fam, and then
Oh,
silence.
no. I was just saying that then we can kind of move to like smaller units,
Yeah.
like families, as teachers, as parents,
Yeah.
etc. But
Yeah.
as a starting point, maybe we can think about how, as a society or as an organization, we can kind of what we can do about this idea and breaking the norm almost. I also saw that one of our attendees has actually written Jay's idea of giving room reminds me of Gymshark, which is open barber shops with trained mental
Ah,
health barbers where men can express and talk about their issues and feelings.
I
Which is
love that idea.
fascinating.
Yeah,
I love
brilliant.
that idea. And I think it
Brilliant.
goes back to that idea, I think, of context, where there are certain contexts where men are actually given more leeway to be expressive. If men are watching a sports match, okay, and they're crying if their team is
Oh yeah,
losing, it's
which is
absolutely
fine.
socially okay.
Yes,
Exactly. They're
that is.
crying, they're getting their
Oh my
face up,
God,
they're
they are.
screaming, they're incredibly emotionally expressive. They're hugging each other.
Yeah.
Even like in sports, you see when like a footballer scores a goal, how they hug each other. Suddenly there's no, oh, men shouldn't hug each other or touch each other. There's so much physical affection. So I
Yeah.
think it's understanding those concepts and then reverse engineering. How can we create those kind of spaces rather than this is the norm, you better fit into this and express your feelings here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suddenly also feel that the way, like, there are two things. There's like actually helping grown older men
Yeah.
to reverse that, like as you said, like use that reverse psychology and actually help them express and help them do certain things which they might think they are not allowed to do. But then
Yeah.
by like I think there's also that part, right? Like where like at a young age only, if you're kind of teaching and educating young people that this is not something that they need to be ashamed of, or like
Yeah.
do what you want to do. I think
Yeah.
that's another way to then lead to like young men and older
Yeah.
men who are much more acceptable of their own skin, like
Yeah.
I am what I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, fascinating
That's a
solution.
beautiful point, Prachi, and I think you've answered or created the first answer for the question you were asking us through that. I think one way to Trojan horse, like what can we help when it comes to like improving norms around masculinity? I think we need to do it like a Trojan horse. We don't need to ask people to abandon masculinity, because I think I look at identity like a Jenga tower. If you're taking something out, everything collapses.
Everything will
Right?
fall. Yeah.
But what you can do is, if you're encouraging men to get in touch with their inner child, childhood is a time where, like Victor and I discussed, these ideas of
Yeah.
masculinity haven't been absorbed yet. It's a time where we are all gender fluid as kids. From the haircuts we have to the games we play and this and that to some extent. So I think helping, like you said, Prachi, helping older people especially, but I think everybody get in touch with an inner child in some sense might be an indirect way to actually help them access parts that masculinity said no. Now you're 12, now you're 13, now you're 14, now you're supposed to be an adult and be a man. I think these two ideas are tied together. But if you go back to childhood, you sort of, but I don't know, what are your thoughts on this, both of you?
No, I absolutely agree with what you both said here. And I'm going to allow to say this. I'm afraid that as most of the things nowadays are working, everything is following an example.
Yeah.
It's everywhere if you think about it. If you have, you know, something untraditional, as probably as shoes, clothes, hairstyle, whatever it is. The moment when you have someone well accepted in the society,
Yeah.
someone, for example, a famous star, you know, Brad Pitt, whoever, Angelina Jolie, whoever, you know, accepting that and showing it, it's becoming totally fine.
Yeah.
Even it's becoming modern, it's becoming a trend.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how we live nowadays. I'm afraid that's the truth. At
Yeah,
least
the
that's
whole
my
influencer concept.
exactly.
Yeah.
And here's the problem. Unfortunately, we have more bad examples than good
That's good
examples.
one.
Yeah.
Yes, because for example, again, it's you know a news like this one person or teenager found a wallet full of money and returned it to, you know, the owner.
Yeah.
That's, you know, at least here, you know, where I'm based, that's reaching the news. That's in the newspaper. Look what have happened.
Yeah.
A miracle, you know. And everyone is like clapping, great, you know, that. Can you imagine that? Something, you know, to be honest, to be, you know, truthful, to be a good person in general is becoming news.
Yeah.
It's becoming something. Can you imagine how, you know, awful and sad that is?
Yeah.
And back to the question with Prachi, what can we do? Probably is just to give good examples of these things. And in organizations, you know, they in the organization you have a leader. This leader is supposed to lead you. When you have a leader who is showing all these things, you know, emotions, feelings, be honest, be transparent, you know, then, you know, I believe that the people who are following this leader in the organization are going to kind of accept that and are going to kind of continue doing that. It's like a chain of events, or at least that's how I would like, you know, to see it and how I understand it based on, you know, my only short 30 years of living on this planet.
Yeah.
I guess that, the whole role modeling aspect.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to role modeling, and I think I've discussed this with Prachi really long ago. I'm not sure if she remembers. But I think this idea of role modeling is especially powerful, like you said, Victor, when it's people who are like, maybe they have social capital and status. But I think especially when they come from places or contexts that are considered to be traditionally masculine and they don't conform to the norm, I think that's really powerful. Prachi, do you recall we discussed at one point this paper where they done research on leadership styles in the Navy SEALs in the US? So this is as like the stereotype, the most ultra masculine, most difficult, you know, forced to get into. And what they found is leaders who are warmer, friendlier, more empathetic, more caring, they tend to be rated as better leaders, even in those kind of contexts, than leaders who are not. And so when you're looking at somebody who's supposed to be from a traditionally masculine background, but you're seeing that, wait, being whatever, caring, warm, friendly, emotional, more expressive, is actually something that can exist in an environment like this and thrive in an environment like this. I think that sets a really powerful example to people who are trying to find their identity and trying to understand what masculinity is. Yeah.
Great. And do you, I guess, like, is there one, coming back to those smaller units, as I said, is there like one thing that, say, every person could do to help people just be themselves, help men just be themselves, be able to express and be, just happy, thriving men almost?
I would say just, you know, not allowing someone else, either a person or society or any other, external force to determine you and to define you as a good or bad man or, less man.
Yeah.
Just believe in yourself, be yourself. And that's it.
Wow.
And I'm asking as a woman, what do you think women or other genders could do to help men as well? What do you think would be the most the most helpful? It could be like actions or thoughts or the way we are behaving as well that could really help men.
I in no way feel qualified to give an answer here. But I have one thought I'd like to share here, which is I think it is related to masculinity, maybe, but I think it ties into the broader work we do with inclusion, which is that sometimes we tend to look at other individuals as a representative of a group as opposed to a full human being. I think it's important to try to avoid doing that and try to look at people as full human beings and not just as a representative of a particular category. I think in conversations and online discourse especially, there's a lot of anger, and I think people talk to each other as a collective. People say you people do this, and you people is like this person is supposed to be a representative of the history of a particular gender, ethnic group, religious group, whatever the case may be. So I guess looking at human beings as just human beings, not as a representative, might be.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
Don't forget that we're human beings, no matter what gender we are, no matter how we look. We're human beings. We share feelings, emotions.
Perfect. That's a great answer, and thanks for that, both of you. I had a lovely time talking to you. This is very different from my regular catch-ups and like work calls. I was really looking forward to it, and thank you both for taking the time out and speaking to me.